Welcome to the UO Today podcast, conversations that offer a glimpse into the heart of the humanities at the University of Oregon. Listen as our faculty, students, and guests introduce ideas and research that help us reflect on the past, navigate the present, and imagine possible futures. I'm Leah Middlebrook, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is Sam Lasman, Assistant Professor of English and Medieval Studies at the University of Oregon. He works on both medieval literature and what he calls modern medievalism, with a focus on how narrative texts use the supernatural, the monstrous, and parahuman to explore identity and communal origins. Working primarily in Welsh, Middle English, French, Persian, and Arabic, Dr. Lasman also has some knowledge of Old Norse, Irish, Old English, Latin, and Middle Persian. Professor Lasman held an ACLS Betty and Carl Pforzheimer Fellowship in British and American Literature during the 2024-25 academic year. He has joined the UO faculty this fall, 2025. Dr. Lasman, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
Tell us some about your background.
Sure. So I guess to begin at the beginning, I grew up in New England, in between Connecticut and Massachusetts. I went to my undergrad was at Yale in New Haven, so staying over there on the East Coast. And as an undergrad, I took a slightly different path from where I've ended up going. I majored in theater studies. I was very into writing and directing in the theater, and also in Middle Eastern studies in a program called Modern Middle Eastern Studies, focused more on modern societies and politics and culture in the Middle East. But in the course of doing that major, I got 4 great years of training in Persian language, which I really fell in love with. And that then, after a few years after my undergrad working in the theater in Boston, I decided to begin grad school. It was not, not an extremely fully formed, fully thought out decision, but it seemed like an interesting thing to do at the time. So I applied to comparative literature programs, got into a comparative literature program at the University of Chicago, which was a great place to do work with Persian, but also in other medieval languages. So I didn't necessarily identify as a medievalist strictly before beginning my graduate school work, but the professors I ended up working with were all pre-modernists, all medievalists. And really, that had been a pre-existing interest to some degree, but they really steered me firmly in that direction, helped me get the training and the grounding in that field and in the languages, and helped me direct my interest to where they ended up, as you introduced, on supernatural and non-human across a number of medieval cultures in Europe and the Middle East. So I did my PhD there at the University of Chicago, and then I had a postdoc briefly at Chicago after I got my degree. Then another postdoc in Cambridge, England, for 3 years, which was really wonderful, working mostly on my own things there, but also doing some teaching, and I'm getting to see the amazing archives and in all of my languages over in the UK. And then this past year, I was at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, in their medieval studies, the Marco Center, which is their medieval and Renaissance studies center. So it's been a long road. I've been to a lot of places, but had the opportunity to work with a lot of amazing people, a lot of amazing students, and I'm very glad that it's brought me here to Oregon.
We are really glad about that too, and it's exciting to get a sense of all the different kinds of faculties and institutions and interlocutors that you've had as you've come here, and now you can be sharing that the fruits of those conversations with us. So that's just great. Tell us a little bit about your dissertation.
Sure. So my dissertation, which was also the basis of my first monograph project, which I'm working on pretty intensely right now, so it's very, very front and center in my mind, looks at the role of different kinds of supernatural beings in three different medieval literary cultures. There are kind of these three interlocking case studies. So in one, I'm looking at giants in medieval Welsh prose storytelling. Another looking at monsters, sort of dragon-like monsters in medieval Persian epic. And another looking at seductive, otherworldly beings in a group of texts called the Lay or Lays in medieval French. And what I see is kind of linking those three case studies is that in all those different cultures, you have medieval storytellers and their audiences um, turning to this category of what I call the parahuman, these imaginary, human-like, but yet not human supernatural beings, turning to those in the stories that they tell as they're trying to tell about communal origins, communal histories, and the past so that these strange supernatural creatures and all their different modes become ways for communities to think about their past and their origins and how this kind of vast inhuman thing that we can call history or the past um, coheres into some kind of present day identity, some kind of community that thinks of itself as um, in the case of the dissertation case studies as Welsh, as Persian, as French, but we can extend that to all kinds of other identities that really coalesced in the medieval period. And subsequently, because then, although in this project I don't get too much into the afterlives of those medieval texts and those ideas, I think really did become central in many ways to how those groups thought of themselves and how they projected those identities forward into the early modern period and into the present.
That's so interesting. And before we started this conversation, I was browsing your really interesting website, and I saw that you had been working on a project about the parahuman, but that was linking your work to coloniality and to science. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I'm thinking about this project, colonizing the other world, scientific
Sure, yeah.
realism and the medieval parahuman.
Yes, no, thanks. Thanks for the kind note on my website. Yeah, so that's the ACLS project that you alluded to, which I'm still kind of finishing up my fellowship work on that. It's not going to cohere into a publication yet. I need to get that first publication done, but I'm really looking forward to getting more into it and working more on it. So the idea there is focusing on this idea that I began encountering in a few different contexts among scholars in the 19th and 20th century, which was this idea that when medieval texts talk about parahumans of various kinds, so when they talk about, say, fairies, or the Aishida, or the people of the Mounds in Ireland, or the Div, or the sort of demon creatures in the Iranian context. This idea comes up in the 19th and 20th century that those are actually stories of different races who used to live in those places and then were conquered later by invaders and either kind of displaced or driven into hiding or subjugated in some way by this incoming invading race. And so that's a form of what's called euhemerism, which is essentially the rationalization of myth and legend. The idea that kind of behind every myth and legend, no matter how much magic or supernatural stuff there is in there, it's actually just a kind of confused retelling of a cold, hard historical fact. And in the 19th and early 20th centuries, there was this idea that race kind of explained everything, that the history of the world could be understood as a history of warfare and conquest among different racial groups, from the perspective of the European writers who I'm focusing on in the early parts of this project, the eventual domination of white Europeans of the world, which was in many ways felt like the sort of geopolitical reality of the 19th and early 20th century with um, the British, French, American empires controlling just huge portions of the globe. So this was really an idea that you could read medieval texts as kind of proof that these sorts of conquests have been happening for ages, back into the distant mythic past before there were even historical records. And it acted as a kind of it sort of validated colonial and imperial endeavors by being able to link these foundational myths um, to that present context of colonialism and imperialism. So it's been very interesting to me to trace the idea, to see where it shows up, to see which authors discuss it, how it gets worked into all kinds of things. I mean, it gets worked into the basis of scientific racism as that sort of eugenics movement of the 19th and early 20th century, but even fields like the early days of fields like anthropology. Indo-European studies is hugely implicated in this topic as well. So this idea really does spread. And even though it does fall out of the academic mainstream around the early to mid 20th century, this in most academic disciplines, this stops being the favored way to talk about fairies or elves or trolls. Other paradigms, other ways of thinking about those beings come into play. But that theory that this project is focusing on gets this whole sort of secondary afterlife in popular fiction, particularly so genre fiction, particularly fantasy and historical fiction, really latch onto this idea because it gives a certain real substance to these mythical beings and allows them to be fictionalized in particular ways. And so sort of throughout the history of those genres, this is an idea that authors have returned to, and that in turn then re-injects this idea into the popular imagination, so that even if most academics today will not say, "Oh yes, the origin of fairies is that they were a Neolithic race who were conquered by, bronze-wielding Aryans or whatever." That idea, because someone may have read something along those lines in a fantasy book or a historical fiction book that they've picked up, that idea can just be out there and can be sort of assumed, especially because I think there's a very widespread and common belief among a lot of people in that kind of basic humorism that myths and legends have to have this basis in a kind of historical fact and historical events. That's not true, but it's very much, I think, a common way that the public at large, if they think about those stories at all, thinks about them.
Hmm. Hmm. And that might be leading us to how it is you talk about modern medievalism. Is that the case?
Yes, so that's very much connected, or I should say that's at the moment the main kind of connection between my work and modern medievalism, which is really just the use of the medieval, in very broad terms, medieval history, medieval culture, medieval ideas in the modern world and in modern culture. So that's a huge field. There are all kinds of different articulations of it. And what I'm most interested in is in regards to this project. It tends to be specifically that looking at fantasy and historical fiction. So just a few of the authors who kind of use this idea or who have kept it alive in the public consciousness. People like Michael Crichton, his novel Eaters of the Dead, and its bizarre movie adaptation, The 13th Warrior. That's kind of a classic example of this trope in action. But you can also find traces of it in someone like Tolkien, and through Tolkien, you get then into the whole fantasy genre in general. George R. R. Martin, the Song of Ice and Fire books, and the Game of Thrones series, which came out of it, which are obviously a massive cultural force in terms of the popularity of the fantasy genre, also really works with and plays with this idea through the Children of the Forest characters in that series. In these again these very popular books, yes, they're set in fantasy worlds, but there's always this link to our world, and there's particularly a sense, I think, with something like A Song of Ice and Fire. It's almost billed as like this is actually how the Middle Ages were. This is, we're stripping away the romanticism and we're just focusing on the brutal realities, which is not very true. The Song of Ice and Fire books are great in many ways, but accurate depictions of medieval life, they are not. But it's very interesting to me that, again, this sort of 19th century idea has this afterlife and this continued popularity through works like that.
And then how did you come to study Persian medieval literature?
Yeah, so that goes back to, I mentioned in my undergraduate days. I was, it was the 2010s, 2011s. There was a lot of news coming out of the Middle East in those days. It felt like an exciting time to be studying that part of the world. So I began taking Persian language as an undergrad, really sort of linked to that interest. And I ended up, going in a different direction with it, falling in love, less with the very complex modern political situation and much more with Persian literature, which has an incredibly long and rich history. And then when I went to the University of Chicago, it was really, at the time, at least when I was there, probably the best place in the U.S. to study Persian, to study pre-modern Persian literature. Specifically, my advisor, Franklin Lewis, who has since sadly passed away, was a major force in creating that community there and in working with me and a lot of other students to really work with that literature, gain appreciation of it. So that's been the kind of how I came to it, how I found it, and it's a huge literature. It's so rich. It's so rich in the kinds of topics I'm interested in, as far as supernatural beings, as far as the relationship between history and mythology, the ways that we see medieval communities kind of building identity out of various sources and various older narratives. So it's proven something that it's been important to me to keep up as much as I can. My spoken Persian has gotten horribly rusty in recent years, I'm ashamed to say, but I have tried to keep up at least some of my ability to read and continue engaging with the scholarship.
That is also exciting. So this is a question that many people are going to follow with great interest. Tell us about the classes that you're teaching here.
Sure. So my classes, I'm not teaching this quarter, which I suppose is good. So, it's no regrets. People haven't signed up for things. But then in winter, I'll be teaching a 200 level English class called The Age of King Arthur. So that's going to be a look at the literature, medieval literature connected to the figure of King Arthur and how that figure has developed over time and been used to talk about all kinds of ideal societies, ideal masculinities, and also to sort of dream and wonder. So I'm very excited to teach that course. That's material I really know well and love. Then also in winter, I'm teaching a 400 level English course on medieval romance. So that's slightly more advanced, a little bit more work, and that'll be because in that class we're really going to be working on reading Middle English, so reading the actual texts of medieval English as they were written at the time, gaining a sense of that language and how it was used. And we're doing that through the genre of romance, which doesn't mean quite what the modern word romance means. It's more about sort of knightly adventures, see how a young man becomes a knight, becomes a member of society. Though that does almost always involve a love affair, and that's where our modern sense of that word comes from. So those are my spring courses. Those are my winter courses. Then in spring, I'm teaching the third level of Old English. So that'll be Old English 3, and we'll be focusing on Beowulf, reading the poem Beowulf in Old English, which I'm very excited for. It's an amazing work of literature. It's not something I've written on or published on, but I think it's one of the things that I read when I was fairly young and made a big impression on me and has been part of my interest in the medieval throughout my life. So very excited to teach that and get into the nitty gritty of the Old English text in that. And then the fourth course is still a little bit up in the air. That's going to be a 400, 500 seminar, so an advanced seminar for undergrads and grad students in English and folklore, cross-listed between those two departments. And the topic is, again, still a bit up in the air, a bit in progress, but it will probably have to do with my research focus on parahumans, so on human-like supernatural beings, and probably taking a pretty interdisciplinary look at those beings. So through literary studies, anthropology, religious studies, a kind of wide-ranging approach to how different societies in the past and the present have thought about our relationships, human relationships to the non-human, through these strange and yet appealing entities.
It sounds like a fantastic year. I was
I
also reading
am.
that you're a creative writer. Is that true? Are you working
I
on?
am, yes. Less than I would like to be of late. The academic writing and other work has taken priority in recent months, but I definitely do think of myself as a creative writer and try to keep up with that. I write, mostly in kind of speculative fiction genre, so fantasy, some more weird fiction or science fiction type stuff. And I was very lucky to attend the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Workshop a few years ago, which was a really amazing experience down in San Diego, but with long historic connections, actually specifically to Eugene, which I didn't know at the time, but I've learned about since. So that's cool. And that's just been a great community it was a great community to learn with, during that time and then to keep up with since, seeing everyone, churn out amazing work and win awards and things. So I have them as my kind of readers, my sounding boards for my work. And I'm hopeful that once I can get some of this, well, specifically this first major monograph project in an outbox off to publishers. I'll have a little bit more time, hopefully, to think about my creative work. But something I will say that just in relation to my teaching as a creative writer, I am really interested in thinking about how creative work can be incorporated into English classrooms and how creative work can be used to engage with text as really creative work as a mode of analysis and interpretation. So that's something I'm really interested in doing, and I'm often try to find ways to work into my syllabi and into my teaching.
Boy, I'm really with you on that. I've been incorporating creative work and
Mm,
as analysis and criticism in my own teaching, and it's such a great methodology to bring into the classroom. It's
yeah,
great to know you're doing that.
yeah.
Have you got a few perceptions of Eugene and of Oregon? What has struck you as you've come here and begun to settle in?
Yeah. So my family is very newly arrived here. We only got here at the beginning of September, so it's all very fresh, all very new. But I would say overall, we are really enjoying being here. We're loving the honestly the walkability is has been a huge one. Just being able to, we were in Knoxville before, which is a very car and highway based city. It's impossible to go anywhere really without going on a highway. Eugene's just much more walkable, much more welcoming in that way. And you're walking through, beautiful neighborhoods, beautiful people's gardens. There are parks everywhere. And that also feeds into the outdoor culture, the outdoor access, which we haven't taken that much advantage of yet, but are very excited to do. Even just this weekend, we took my I have a 16-month-old son. We went out to a farm and picked some pumpkins. It was like 15-minute drive from our house. So that just accessibility to nature, to the outdoors, to rural culture and rural life, I think is really exceptional here. I'm excited to do more of that. So all of that has been great. The food scene, honestly, we're loving. The Saturday farmers market is incredible, and everything that comes with that. Yeah, lots more to explore. It's also very new and fresh, but so far we're making a great transition.
Well, here at the OHC, we just wish you all success and all kinds of fun and adventure exploring the area in your free time when you're not doing your amazing research and teaching these great sounding classes. So, thank you for taking a little time today to say hello and tell us a bit about your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the conversation. It's been great.
I have been speaking with Sam Lasman, Assistant Professor of English and Medieval Studies at the University of Oregon. Our Research Notes segment helps keep us current on recent developments in University of Oregon faculty and student research. In this episode, Martha Bayless tells us about her book, Entertainment, Pleasure, and Meaning in Early England, which was published in 2024. Martha Bayless is professor of English at the University of Oregon. Her research interests include folklore, medieval studies, cultural studies, and food studies. Martha, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
How would you describe your research focus?
Well, I work on the popular culture of the Middle Ages, especially, but not exclusively, the early Middle Ages. So what that means basically is all the fun stuff about the Middle Ages. So food, magic, games, storytelling, the things they did when they were kind of off the clock, so to speak, or um, off the water clock, I guess. Because a lot of what people do is focused on the kind of serious things, like how they thought about God and how they wrote manuscripts and how they were regulated their lives and things. But also when, they weren't doing things that were necessary, they were doing things that were fun. And they spent a lot of time doing things that were fun. And I wanted to know, what did they do that was fun? Not that all of it was always fun. Making food was not always fun, but eating it was usually fun. The ma Making the magic or having the demand for magic was not always fun, but there was a lot of fun in magic. And so I like to look at what they did when they were doing the things they wanted to do instead of the things they had to do.
Terrific. Tell us specifically about the project of your book.
Well, it covers a wide range of things that they did in Anglo-Saxon England for relaxation and for pleasure, and also for things like showing their status, showing how rich they were, or showing how accomplished they were. So it's about games, feasting, all kinds of food making, holidays, festivals, storytelling, music, things like that.
What kinds of research did you do to bring that material forward? I can imagine, were you diving into archives or looking at festival records, or how did you assemble?
Well, I think there's a reason that nobody had written that book before, as I found out when I got into it, because there's no one source for it. You have to read 1,000 big sources, and then there's one line that mentions it in each of those sources. So you put it together that way. But the picture that emerges is pretty coherent. You can see big patterns and like hunting, they only mention hunting, now and then in things. But when you look at it, you can see that they mention the same things over and over again. For instance, it became clear that hunting was kind of the sport of the rich. It was not a thing that people actually did, because they were poor and desperate. I mean, maybe somebody would go out and try to capture a rabbit or something, but it wasn't a big production for most people. Most people just cultivated their little farms and ate that way. But the rich, it was a big dangerous sport, and people died often in it. I think it's sort of like climbing Everest or heli-skiing or something like that, where you showed off by doing it. You're really rich and you say, I'm going to mount a hunt and I'm going to get all these horses and hounds together and we're going to go out in the woods and then we're going to have mishaps. And so whether you lived through the hunt was a big question, and so it was a big, daring, showy thing to do. And you just get little pieces of this over and over and over again, but you start to see the patterns of people deciding, I'm rich, I'm going to show off. Now it's time for hunting.
I can't wait to read this book. What makes your work on medieval studies and medieval popular culture important to humanity?
Well, I certainly tell people it's important to humanity all the time, but I don't know how much they believe me. I think the Middle Ages are really fascinating for two reasons. One is that they were really very much like us, even though their circumstances were very different. Their level of technology was very different. Obviously, they're in a different part of the world if you live in the US. And their understanding of how the world worked was very different. And yet you see people reacting in the same human ways over and over again. You see they like to do the same things to have fun. They feel grief the same way. They throw insults at each other. They relish pranks and silly nicknames. So you really get this sense that we're all one. The other reason is that they're so different from us. And that's fascinating in the ways in which they're different. So you find that they conclude very different things from the same things that happen. Like if your cow stops giving milk, why is it? And they would immediately think, well, a fairy put a spell on my cow or something like that. And so just the kind of mind-bending different reasoning that they can sometimes have is it's a little bit like reading science fiction in that you think, oh, things can be very, very different in ways I hadn't thought of yet. So uh, it's helpful to see the ways in which things can be different, and also helpful to see the ways in which things are exactly the same. I'll just mention one other way in which things are exactly the same, which is that people got fed up with cooking. And frequently they'd get home from, a hard day's work and they'd say, oh, forget this. And they'd go down to the chop house, like down the street, and get takeout food, and now we're saying, oh, the death of home cooking, it's the fall of civilization and everything. But people have been tired of home cooking for, more than 1,000 years. So that's kind of reassuring when you get home and you think, I don't want to cook a big thing. You're having exactly the same sentiment as someone 1,000 years ago.
I sense your new coffee table book, which would be, takeout then and now.
Yeah, and I'm
Martha,
not sure it was that good for you back then either, but
the chop house sounds pretty good right now. We're recording this at lunchtime. Um, Martha, where can we learn more about these topics?
well, the great thing about the modern age is that it's all over the internet, so you can find lots of little history podcasts and YouTube channels and things like that. Of course, if anybody is moved to take a class in those things, we have a lot of fun in Old English, and we even try some cooking sometimes. And there's a million ways in the modern age. TV shows, although I mean, part of the fun of knowing about this stuff is that you can laugh at the ridiculous claims of the TV shows, but they do a good job of recreation. Books, I innumerable ways.
Well, we'll post a link to your book and a few other tidbits in the show notes for today. I have been speaking with Martha Bayless, a professor of English at the University of Oregon, about her recent book, Entertainment, Pleasure, and Meaning in Early England. The book was published in 2024. UO Today is a production of the Oregon Humanities Center at the University of Oregon. Thanks for listening.